morning, everyone. My name is AJ Taylor, and I'm the Associate Director of the Columbia Startup Lab. We are so excited to welcome you to today's CSL Talks. So CSL Talks is essentially the TED Talk for the entrepreneurship ecosystem here at Columbia University. CSL Talks brings together past and present CSL alum to discuss their entrepreneurial journeys and expertise in their respective fields. Today, I am so happy to introduce Zach Ringelstein, a Columbia College graduate and current Teacher College doctoral student who's a former teacher, two-time EdTech entrepreneur, Forbes 30 Under 30, and the list goes on. Zach will be discussing something incredibly topical in today's climate, which is the future of learning. And with that, Zach, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome, and I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, AJ. It's a pleasure to be here, everybody. Today, I'm going to grapple with a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is learning. And we're not talking about just any kind of learning. We're talking about real learning. I'm going to start with my core beliefs. My beliefs, first and foremost, after having watched the Michael Jordan documentary that teachers deserve championship rings. Technology can never replace teachers, but can make their lives better. And that real learning engages, inspires, is joyful, and puts students in the driver's seat. I'm going to repeat that. Real learning engages, inspires, is joyful, and puts students in the driver's seat. Just a quick intro about who I am, and then I'm really looking forward to getting to know you. First of all, I taught elementary school for 5 years. I started an ed tech company called UClass in 2012, exited to Renaissance Learning, a company owned partially by Google, in 2015. I've been involved in policy. I wrote the 60K minimum teacher salary policy, which much of the Democratic presidential field for president adopted in their work this year. I'm doing doctoral studies at Teachers College, and I most recently founded Zigazoo, which is a way for classrooms to basically share their projects with their students, or pod leaders to share projects with students, and then for students to respond with short form video. Some people say it's very similar to TikTok, but it's educational and really valuable in this day and age. So I want to start with some teaching 101. And I'm saying this from a place of research as somebody who is getting my doctorate and thinking a lot about how you really engage kids in joyful learning. And it's funny because a TED Talk is basically a lecture. So I'm going to start by telling you that lecturing is a bad instructional model, especially when remote, and especially for kids. So I think it's important for us all to remember today that even though this is the format, and I can't see any of your faces, I would love to be smiling at you. It's super awkward. There are moments right now already when I'm like, oh, are you engaged? How does my hair look? What's going on? I can't make eye contact. Think about, now you're an adult, you do this all day long maybe for other types of business and work, but imagine you're a kid and you're on the receiving end of that, and you're developing into the person you're gonna become. I want us all to remember that as we talk about what remote learning can be and should be today. So let me be a model of exemplary remote learning and lecture at you the whole time. Just kidding. So the first thing I'm actually gonna have you guys do, this is kind of for fun, is I would like for you to start today by doing something that I think would be an exemplary model of remote learning. So I'm gonna have you all go on and install Zigazoo, our app. We actually just launched our Classrooms product, and I would like for you to sign up as a student with a classroom. So you go in, you continue with a classroom, and then you sign up as a student. I provided the code for you, WPQSJZ. Again, it's WPQSJZ. And I want you to shoot a 30-second video. Yes, I mean it. Please keep yourselves on mute if you can. But I'd like for you to shoot a 30-second video and introduce yourself. When you go on the Zigazoo app, you'll notice that actually it's all there for you, and you're able to go to the top. It'll say, can you introduce yourself? And I want you to respond to that prompt with a 30-second video. And I don't mind, while I'm talking today, I'd like for you to Flick through, see who else is on the call, engage with them, give them a Superman emoji or give them a heart, because this isn't just about me giving information to you. This is about all of us collaborating together, which is the essence of good remote learning. So I want to start with two very important reminders. The first important reminder that I think a lot of people who make ed tech products forget is that in-person learning is almost always better. So if you and I were in a room together, this would be a lot better, period. And I think it's really important to remember that, and we're doing the best with the circumstances we have currently. And then the second thing, which is really important to me, as somebody who really cares about childhood development psychology, is that kids still need what they've needed all along, first and foremost. And that is to satisfy the needs in Maslow's hierarchy. And at the bottom is the most important: air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction. Safety needs: personal, security, employment, resources, health, and property, friendship, intimacy, family, sense of belonging. And then it goes up into respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, and freedom. And then finally, self-actualization, desire to become the most that one can be. And I want us to all remember that these are the basics of education. And if you remove these and do things that come at the expense of their physiological needs, their safety needs, their love and belonging, you're not going to be able to teach them. You're not going to be able to reach the prefrontal cortex of their brain. And ultimately, we want to be able to do that so that kids can then learn and get to that place of esteem and self-actualization. So with that, I want to start by asking you all a question. Maybe in the chat, I would love to see if you can respond for me to this question. Today, how would you describe our world compared to what it was 50 or 60 years ago? What are some adjectives that you would use to describe the work world, the social world, and the world that our kids, our students, will be graduating into? I would love to see some opportunity. I would love to see in the chat your responses. Competitive, fast phasing, unpredictable, uncertain, virtual, more transparency, chaos, chaotic, complex, unsettling, connected, progressing. Well, I see a lot more, and they're right on. Our world is complex, it's dynamic, it's exciting, it's interconnected, and all of the things you just said. But there's no doubt that our classrooms don't look like our world. In a nutshell, how would you describe not the classroom setting of the 2020-21 world, but the classroom that our students just left to enter this new remote learning world? What are some adjectives that you would use to describe the classroom that you see in front of you, the average American classroom to this day? I would love to see those also in the post. Static, boring, old school, structured, stagnant. Any others? All right. And with that, I'm going to share mine, which I would say test-based and standardized, unidirectional and teacher-centered, meaning that there is a one-way form of communication that students are supposed to receive all of the time. I would say disengaging because of that, and very insular. So a question that we want to ponder overall, our driving question for the day, is: does the world of learning that we're giving our students, does it prepare them for the world that they will graduate into ultimately? And I think that our students would probably say no. And here is some stats from a Gallup poll in 2015 that I think is fascinating. Most American kids don't like what they're doing at school. 75% of kids feel engaged in grade 5, and that number goes way down to the low 30s by 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. These are really sad numbers. But honestly, can we sit back as Americans and say we blame them? Is this the student's fault? And what are we doing wrong? And I would hazard to say that one of the things we're doing wrong is we're saying, hey, everybody sit in these rows, read this paragraph and answer these multiple choice questions, and that's school and that's learning. As opposed to saying, hey, here's a driving question. Here is a big problem that looks like your real life that I want you to solve, and let's learn the standards and the skills by doing these. And so I would love for you to take a second, also on Zigazoo. I hope that you've all logged in. If you haven't yet, I would love it if someone would write in the chat. Actually, I'll scoot back in my slides just to be helpful. If you haven't or you've just entered our meeting, go ahead and type in, when you go in as a student, WPQSJZ, and you can answer our second question. I'm going to type this in the chat for you, WPQSJZ. And I want you to respond to this next question for me, that if I were your teacher, I would be reviewing and having a good time with. Do you think students will be more or less engaged in remote learning than in-person learning? Do you think students will be more or less engaged in remote learning than in-person learning? And then film your answer on Zigazoo. I'd love for you to write in the chat box too. I'm not able to, because this is being recorded live, I'm not able to review all of your answers as we speak, but it would be great if you could look at these as we go. You should be seeing other folks' responses, other people's videos on your feed if you flick through. So I'm going to give you that time, and I'm going to continue as we go. So feel free. Again, you're on mute. I know that you're listening. I know that you're paying attention to me, but also engaging with your classmates and collaborating as best we can during this time. And I would just say that my answer to that, and I don't want to steal any of your thunder if you're still recording, but my answer to that is that, okay, so you can imagine that these students are not engaged. Basically, a third of students in high school are engaged. That means we're leaving 2/3 of our students out. That's a lot. That's a lot of kids to not be engaged. We're going to enter our workforce and be citizens in this country. And unfortunately, most popular ed tech is built for the 2019 model of school. It's test-based, it's unidirectional, it's disengaging, and it's insular. And so what I see a lot of schools and districts doing, sadly, is they are taking the old model of school and trying to apply it to remote learning, which we know is not going to work, does not work for our kids. Because if you can imagine what it feels like to sit in a classroom and be that bored when you have your friends around and in-person instruction, you can imagine what it feels like to sit there and be twice as bored as you are sitting there watching a Zoom call. And that is what we're doing. I live in a neighborhood where there are a lot of people who are walking around during this time, and a lot of kids, and they started school the other day, and a parent stopped me and just said, I'm just going out. I just cannot believe what is going on right now. My son, who is 8 years old, is sitting on a Zoom call for the second hour. She goes, I didn't quit my job to do this, and this is ridiculous. And that's how a lot of parents are feeling, because kids are bored. Kids can't sit that long. I can't even sit that long. So one of the things that I recently discussed with some scholars and teachers about is whether or not there are any silver linings to this pandemic for education. And I was talking with some folks at the American Federation of Teachers and otherwise about this statement. Most kids so simply won't do work they don't care about without school systems in place. And as we've seen with recent data, many will just stop attending. And that is really sad. We can't do that to kids. So education suddenly needs to be more engaging and meaningful for kids to do the work and for parents not to opt out of the system during this time. So I've been thinking a lot about what the foundation of the American education system is. And the foundation of the American education system is based in some of John Dewey's work. One of the things that John Dewey said was, give the pupil something to do, not something to learn. And the doing is of such a nature as to demand thinking. Learning naturally results. And as part of project-based learning, there are 3 key components. I could go into this in detail, but I'm not going to today. There's a driving question that guides all of the learning. You want to make sure that you're doing experiential learning activities where kids are engaging hands-on in projects. And you always want to make sure there is a public project, so an output that is built and created, something, a video, an experiment, whatever it might be. And then you always want to have an audience for it. And you are not, as a teacher, are not enough of an audience. It needs to be a public audience so that kids really care about the output and the product. And so this is where it really applies to ed tech. And I'm going to really dive into what tools work and how to build a schedule around remote learning that inspires and gets kids actually learning during this time. So there's a difference between what I would consider synchronous instruction and asynchronous instruction. Synchronous is what we're doing right now. I'm talking, you're listening. You're on the call with me at the same time. We're all together live. Asynchronous means that I am facilitating something that you're going off and doing on your own. And by the way, asynchronous can be as simple as giving students opportunities to socialize in their real life with whatever community they're comfortable with for health situations. So for example, we know kids need social interactions. So one thing we can do asynchronously, because we can't give that to them the same way we can in schools as teachers, is we can say, hey, I'm going to develop a project where kids are interviewing family members or are forced to collaborate. No, not with their classmates all the time, but maybe in person, live with their family members or whomever they have potted up with. And so I want to talk a little bit about the difference between synchronous and asynchronous and really spell it out for you. So in synchronous education, so where I am on a Zoom call as a teacher and sharing with students, the teacher gives information. In asynchronous, the teacher is facilitating learning. In synchronous education, student sits there and listens. And in asynchronous, a student is the driver of their own learning. For synchronous, better for facts regurgitation. And for asynchronous, it's better for problem solving and complex thinking, critical thinking. And then for synchronous, everybody learns at the same pace, which we know isn't the case. Even really, geniuses, Einstein, sometimes it took him longer to solve certain problems than other people. And so forcing people to stay on the same pace isn't a good idea. Students, and then in asynchronous, students are solving their problems at their own pace. And then maybe finding really cool challenges that they want to work on their own. And then with synchronous, there's little student voice or creativity. And with asynchronous instruction, there's more student voice and creativity. So some examples of some tools that do synchronous. We know that Zoom does synchronous, as we're on right now. We know that Edmodo is a classroom tool, as is Google Classrooms, as is Schoology. These are tools that were built for classrooms that are doing in-person learning, and so is Khan Academy. But we know that there is a new realm of remote learning tools, including Zigazoo, which we just built, Seesaw Education, News ELA, that are building asynchronous ways of doing learning, where kids are not having to do it live with their teacher on a Zoom call, wishing all the while that they could just get off the call because it's so boring. They are able to do these projects in real life, having real meaningful experiences that are really powerful. And so let me give you an example on Zigazoo. If you signed up for an account and did my little projects at the beginning, you did asynchronous PBL, asynchronous project-based learning. You can go on Zigazoo, you can find and assign any project that has already been built for at-home learning. You can also create your own. And then you can go ahead and have your students do the learning. What one person who is a long-term educator and part of the National Council for Teaching English, she said recently, Zigazoo is what all ed tech should be. It shouldn't just be a tool where kids are regurgitating facts, but where they're actually thinking creatively. And what she said was really powerful to me. She said, what's so cool about these projects is that it could take a minute to do the project, or it could take a whole day. And that's what the power of project-based learning is. So you can do the project on your own time. In this example, it's can you use centripetal force to spin a penny in a balloon? And then you can go ahead and record on the spot and share it on your feed. You get to shoot short form videos that then students can flick through. They can see other examples of work, giving them examples to think about and reflect on and maybe learn from. And then teachers can review the work throughout the day. And this is all very similar to TikTok. And we did that on purpose because kids, whether we like it or not, they're going to be on TikTok. They're going to be on social media. And so the social media format really helps with this kind of learning because kids are then going through, they don't even know they're learning. They've just done a science experiment and they have had the opportunity to flick through and see their friends who they're missing and learn at the same time. A police department in the US randomly wrote a review of us to share with their community. And they called us a gummy vitamin. They said, Zigazoo is like a gummy vitamin because you think you're eating gummy bears, but you're really learning. We also are introducing channels soon. Everyone from the most recent winner of Best Children's Album at the Grammy Awards to the Tech Interactive Museum in San Jose, children's museums, Lit World, and wonderful teachers across the country will have official channels that you can follow who will be sharing projects and you can pull those down into your classroom. I think it's important to, as a doctoral student, it's important for me to share that project-based learning isn't fluffy. I think that one of the biggest marketing campaigns of the last 2 decades in education has been around the idea that you have to basically do really well on tests in order to be taken seriously, both as a teacher and as a student. But the reality is that around the world, those who are doing project-based learning early are actually doing better on tests later. The more you actually test kids early, the worse they will do later, both because of the psychological effects of anxiety and all the things that tests do, but also because the short-term impact of tests might be a higher score in that quarter, but long-term, you're not really building real knowledge. And here's some research that I can share, that project-based learning was more effective than traditional instruction for long-term retention, skill development, and satisfaction of students and teachers. I want to finally share an example of an effective asynchronous schedule with you, where kids are learning remotely, but they're not doing it in a boring way. They're not sitting on calls all day. And it does include some synchronous education because it is important to regroup. So my example, and by the way, if you're a teacher out there, there are a million different kinds of schedules. So I'm not even going to try to put minutes on this or put times on this, but you would start with a community meeting via Zoom and you do an activity together that engages students. You give students frequent opportunities for interaction, whether that's through commenting, raising hands, or even sharing, depending on the size of the group. You don't want people to share for 20 minutes. That's actually a great way to use Zigazoo, just like I did with you all introducing yourselves. You also can do breakout rooms on Zoom and other technologies, which is a wonderful way to break up long sessions. After that, which shouldn't be more than 45 minutes or an hour, depending on the age, and definitely not more than a half an hour for kids who are in lower elementary school, you can assign a project on Zigazoo. You can give students time to do the project. And then all the while, you're not done teaching, by the way. Just like a good project-based learning teacher would do in a school day, all the while you have a rotating group of students who you're checking in with. So you're checking in with with each person one-on-one or in groups, and you're basically checking in on that project or maybe their literacy skills, whatever it might be, so that while people are off doing these projects, you're checking in on them, holding them accountable, as well as giving them suggestions for what they can do next. And then once you have done your check-ins, you're able to obviously check in on Zigazoo and see all the work that they've done, the different milestones that they've reached through their videos. People can interact and have fun with that. And then at the end of the day, or at the end of whatever session or class you're leading, you can debrief. And this is a time for honest reflection on how the project went, what could go better, et cetera, and so forth. And so with that, I want to say that this is a very, very challenging time. I think teachers are saints, again, deserve championship rings. It was the hardest job I've ever done. And I think that first and foremost, if you're a teacher out there, give yourself a pat on the back for even deciding to dive into the deep end of this year. And I hope that maybe there is a silver lining to this all, which is that we can start to recognize that the standardized tests, as a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old, don't matter as much as deep learning and collaboration. That at the end of the day, students have opportunities through remote learning to do experiential learning. In fact, it might be the only way that we get them to learn and more people engaged in the process. And so as we build great remote learning through Zigazoo and other tools, I hope that in some ways, this creates the foundation for what will be the future of learning, which is one where kids are engaged, where kids are joyful, and where there's purpose in their learning.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you so much for your time today. Anyone wants to follow up and see the CSL Talk, we'll be promoting it on social media, YouTube, etc. And thank you again, Zach, thank you, and everyone have a nice day.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
Bye, everyone.